The sky is not a sky. It is a ceiling of ash. Above us, no stars shine. Only the faint glow of chemical fires that burn without end, licking at the horizon from slag heaps that never cool. The clouds are a permanent bruise of black and red, choking out even the idea of a dawn. The air tastes of iron filings, of rust and charred bone. Every breath is a punishment, sharp, metallic, as though the lungs themselves are cut open with glass. We breathe because we must, but each breath feels like a tithe extracted for the Emperor's wars. And the sound, Emperor preserve us, the sound never stops. Drills scream as they tear into the planet's flesh. Machinery hums and rattles until it becomes part of your skull, a vibration you carry into dreams. Chains drag as workers stumble in lines, their boots clanging on rusted steel. The chorus of coughs is unending, some wet with phlegm, some dry and ragged, some flecked with blood. You can tell how close a man is to death by the tone of his cough, like miners can tell the quality of or from a single strike of the pickaxe. We do not speak of silence here. There is no silence. This is not industry. This is devotion. Mining worlds are not planets. They are sacrifices. They are tithe worlds whose bones are broken open so the Imperium may drink from the marrow. Our blood oils the machines. Our children are the gears. Our lives are currency. And yet what we give is never enough. Because deeper than drills dare to reach, beneath strata of rock carved by generations of chained hands, there are caverns, tunnels sealed with chains, walls painted with the Aquila not as blessing but as warning. When the rock shifts too deep, when the picks strike veins that bleed something darker than iron, we hear voices, whispers rising up from the stone itself, curling into our ears like smoke. We tell ourselves it is the wind. We know it is not. Pause, industrial rumble grows louder. But that is only the beginning. Origins and early history musical note atmosphere. Faint wind through hollow tunnels. A low, sorrowful choir tone. Narrator reflective. Grim, the first miners came in chains. Prisoners. Dead oath breakers. Political dissidents. The Imperium called it settlement. But for those dragged here, it was exile. A sentence without end. The first ships descended on scorched plains where nothing grew. Their holds vomited out men and women already broken by years of confinement. Stripped of name, stripped of past. Their only future, the mines. The early shelters were nothing more than metal sheets hammered into shacks. Tunnels collapsed with cruel regularity, entombing entire work crews. The air was thick with soot, and the water, when they found it, ran red with metal shavings. To drink was to choke, and yet to refuse was to die. The overseers were fewer then, and weaker, but hunger and fear made the strongest chains. Food was scarce. Water was tainted. Survival was a lottery won only through betrayal. One man steals another's ration, and the second man starves. A mother hides an extra cup of grain for her child. Her neighbor whispers her name to the guards. This was the beginning. A crucible designed to strip humanity to its core. They tell us of Varos, the first overseer, a man who demanded quotas so vast that even his own lungs collapsed from the dust. He forced miners to work as he drowned in his own blood. When his airlock failed, he clawed at the door until his fingernails broke. They sealed him inside, still screaming. The story says his ghost wanders the shafts to this day, counting every strike of the pickaxe, cursing those who dare slow their pace. We do not know if it is true, but when the drills fall silent, when the dust clears enough for thought, some say they feel his eyes watching. Sound cue, faint tapping like a pickaxe in the distance. Even in the first years, hunger gnawed more fiercely than chains. Betrayal became currency. Trust became impossible. Families tore themselves apart before the mines even had the chance. And still, the work continued, because to stop is death. And death is mercy the overseers will not grant. Transition hook to daily life section. Musical note atmosphere. Shift horn blaring, metallic echoes, cages rattling downward. Narrator grim, intimate that was the birth of this world. The beginning of its long, endless cycle. But the question is not how it began. The question is, how does it continue? What does it mean to live each day beneath the ash sky, where hope is forbidden and survival is worship? The answer lies in the routines we dare call life. The morning light came thin and gray, stretched across the frost-tipped grass and the low fences that marked out the ranch. Caleb Morgan had always risen early, though he no longer hurried through his mornings. There was no one left to share the pace of them. He took his coffee slow, let the silence sit around him, and only after the first cup did he pull on his coat and step into the chill. He did not expect to find the barn door unlatched. It hung just wide enough for the wind to nudge it, making the wood moan softly on its hinges. Caleb paused, his brow furrowing, but he said nothing at first. This land was quiet. Nothing and no one came uninvited. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The smell was there before he saw her. The faint scent of lavender soap mixed with the sharper trace of worn leather, not belonging to him, not belonging to this place. His boots carried him further into the dimness until the shapes sharpened. A woman, curled on a pile of old feed sacks tucked between the stacked hay bales. Her dress was travel-stained, hem heavy with dust, and her shawl had slipped to the ground. She had not stirred when the door opened. Caleb studied her stillness the way a man studied the horizon for a storm. She was young, though not a girl, and her face was drawn tight with weariness. Her hair, loosened from its pins, fell in dark strands across her cheek. In her hands, she held something close, almost fiercely. A small book, perhaps, or a folded piece of paper. Caleb could not tell. He did not speak at once. He stood there, letting the quiet wrap around both of them. He was a man accustomed to solitude, and now solitude had shifted shape into something he did not recognize. Finally, his voice came low and steady, more observation than challenge. "You'll catch your death in here." The woman startled awake. Her eyes, startlingly clear even in the dimness, flashed toward him, wide with something more than fear. She scrambled to sit up, clutching the paper tighter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words broke sharp, as though unused. "I didn't mean, I'll go." Caleb lifted one hand, palm outward. "No one's turning you out. Not yet." That quiet steadiness in him was what stopped her from fleeing. She sat, still tense, like a bird caught between the urge to fly and the exhaustion that clipped its wings. Caleb took a slow breath, the kind he used when calming a spooked horse. "You've been out all night." His eyes went to her thin shoes, the way the damp had marked them. "You eat." She shook her head, quick and almost ashamed. For a long moment he simply looked at her. A stranger in his barn, a secret pressed in her hand, a weight in her silence that felt heavier than her thin frame could carry. Caleb knew he should demand her name, her reason, but the years had made him patient. Questions could wait. Hunger could not. "Come on," he said finally. His voice held no edge, only quiet command. "Kitchen's warmer than this." She hesitated, then rose slowly, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. The paper, whatever it was, remained clutched in her hand. And as Caleb stepped aside to let her pass, he realized the strange truth of it. For the first time in a long while, the silence on this ranch was not his alone. The first frost of autumn came quietly one night. By morning, the edges of the creek were rimmed with ice, and the horse's breath rose like steam in the cold dawn. Caleb noticed it before she did. How the season was changing, how the nights were longer now, and how the barn seemed to creak and sigh against the chill. She was still sleeping in the loft, despite his half-hearted offers to let her move into the house. He never pressed her. It was clear she wasn't ready. Some invisible wall still stood between them, a thing neither of them spoke of, though both knew it was there. That night, when the wind rattled the loose shingles and the lantern burned low, he found himself walking out to the barn after supper. He told himself it was to check on the mare ready to foal, but really it was something else, something harder to name. The barn smelled of hay and horses, of earth and wood warmed by the day's sun. He climbed the ladder to the loft quietly, unsure what he meant to say if she woke. But she wasn't asleep. She was sitting up, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the single crack in the boards where the moonlight spilled through. "You're awake," he said, surprised at the softness in his own voice. Her head turned slightly, but she didn't look at him. "I don't sleep much." He nodded and lowered himself onto the floor beside her. The boards creaked, and for a long while neither spoke. Outside, an owl called. The mare shifted in her stall. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried weight. Finally, she whispered, "I keep thinking I'll wake up, and this will all be gone. The ranch, the quiet, even you sitting here." He turned to look at her then, but her face was half-shadowed, unreadable. "Why would it be gone?" "Because good things don't stay," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. Something tightened in his chest. He wanted to ask what she had run from, who had hurt her, why she flinched at kindness, but he didn't. He wasn't sure she could bear it. Instead, he reached out, slowly, and laid his hand over hers where it gripped the blanket. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low, "good things do stay. You just got to give them a chance." For the first time since she arrived, she turned and looked him full in the face. The moonlight caught her eyes, and he saw there all the weight she carried, all the secrets pressed so deep they seemed carved into her bones. She didn't answer him, not yet, but she didn't move her hand either. And in that small, wordless choice, something shifted, fragile as frost, but real. The evenings carried a stillness that belonged only to ranch land. Crickets sang in the grass, and the horizon darkened with a slow patience that made a man realize how small his troubles were. John often stood on the porch as the sun slid away, listening to the silence stretch across the hills. It was in those hours, when the air grew cool and the cattle settled in the pastures, that he thought most about the woman in his barn, Clara. She moved softly, like a shadow that did not wish to disturb anything it touched. From his window, he sometimes glimpsed her carrying water from the well or stacking wood by the barn door. He noticed she worked more than she needed to, mending tack, brushing down the horse, sweeping corners no one swept. Perhaps she was trying to repay him for the roof he'd given her. Or perhaps she was keeping her hands busy, the way people do when they carry thoughts too heavy to set down. John let her be. He knew the weight of silence and what it meant to guard it. But still, he watched. One evening, lantern in hand, he crossed the yard and entered the barn. The animals stirred at his presence, but Clara did not look up. She sat on a bale of hay, her hands folded around a piece of cloth she had been sewing. The lamplight softened her features, showed the tiredness in her face, and also the steadiness. "You've made yourself at home," John said gently, his voice low enough not to startle her. She raised her eyes at last. "I didn't mean to. I can move on, if you'd rather." Her words struck something in him. Move on. As if she expected it. As if she'd said it before, in other barns, to other men who'd found her sheltering where she did not belong. "You can stay," he answered simply. For a moment, her shoulders eased. Then the silence stretched again, filled only by the shuffle of hooves. John leaned against a beam, letting the weight of words come slowly. "Whatever you're running from," he said at last, "I don't need to know. Not unless you want me to. All I ask is honesty if you choose to stay." Her gaze dropped to her sewing. Sometimes honesty is the heaviest thing of all. He did not press her. He only nodded, and the lantern between them flickered against the barn walls, throwing their shadows side by side. That night, John walked back to his house alone. But for the first time in years, he felt the quiet was no longer empty. The rains had passed, leaving the land washed clean. The sky stretched wide and blue. New shoots of grass had sprung along the edges of the pasture, glistening from the morning dew. For the first time in months, the ranch felt less like a graveyard and more like a place that might hold life again. Caleb sat at the worn kitchen table, a sheet of paper before him. The pen hung loosely in his calloused fingers. Across the paper, only 3 words had been scratched out. "Dear Anna May," his late wife's name. He hadn't intended to write her. He hadn't picked up a pen in years. But since Clara had come, silence pressed against him in a way he couldn't ignore. He wanted to speak, if not to Clara, then to the memory of the woman who had left this earth too soon. He tried again, pen dragging slow. There's someone here now. The ink blotted. He set the pen down hard. The truth stuck in his throat. He wanted to confess that Clara's presence unsettled him, not because she was a danger, but because she was alive in a way he had forgotten people could be. She had laughter hidden inside her, though he had only caught the faintest edges of it. She carried her scars, yet walked as if she still believed in some horizon. And Caleb, for all his grief, had begun to feel the faint ache of wanting again. He shoved the paper away. The letter was not for Anna May. It was not for anyone. The words would only burn him. That evening, Clara found him on the porch, watching the last light sink behind the hills. She said nothing at first, standing beside him, arms crossed against the chill. After a long silence, she asked, softly, "Do you ever talk to her still?" Caleb stiffened. "Who?" "Your wife." His jaw worked, but no words came. Finally, he nodded once. "Sometimes. In my head." Clara studied him, her gaze steady. "I talk too. Not to anyone in the ground, but to the part of myself I left behind when I ran." Her words startled him. She rarely admitted anything about her past. But tonight her voice trembled, carrying the weight of something long unsaid. He wanted to ask her more, but he couldn't press. Instead, he spoke low. "Some things talking don't fix." "Maybe not," she said. "But silence kills quicker." The porch fell quiet again, yet something had shifted. They did not touch, they did not confess. But in the hush of twilight, two broken lives leaned just slightly toward each other. Inside, the half-written letter lay folded on the table, unsent and unfinished, but not forgotten. The first snow of the season came early, heavy and relentless. It beat against the windows and piled against the barn doors until everything outside seemed buried in white silence. Inside the ranch house, the fire worked hard, but the chill crept in anyway, finding the corners of every room. Samuel watched from the window as the storm rolled down the valley, muting the mountains. He thought of the woman in the barn. She hadn't left since the first snow had come, and now, he realized, she couldn't leave even if she wanted. The barn light glowed faintly through the curtain of snow. It gave him an uneasy feeling, knowing she was out there in the cold. She had chosen to stay, yes, but still, there was something in him that wanted to see if she was warm, if she was safe. He told himself it was just decency, nothing more. By late evening, he finally gave in. Pulling his coat tight, he walked across the yard, boots sinking into the drifts. The wind howled like a beast, rattling the barn doors as he pushed them open. She was there, sitting on a blanket near the horses, lantern beside her. Her hair was undone, falling across her face, and her hands were wrapped around a mug of water as though it were a cup of tea. She looked up quickly, startled. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though her voice was more weary than sharp. "You shouldn't either," he replied. His tone came out rougher than intended. "The roof holds, yes, but the wind cuts through every board. You'll freeze if you stay much longer." Her lips pressed together, as though she wanted to argue but couldn't find the strength. For a moment, she simply stared at the floorboards, then whispered, "I can't leave. Not yet." He studied her carefully. The storm outside pounded, but inside the barn there was only the fragile quiet of her words. "Then at least come inside for the night," he said, his voice softer now. "Whatever you're hiding, whatever it is, it can wait until morning. No secrets worth freezing to death." Her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Fear, perhaps, or sorrow. She shook her head slowly. "I promised myself I wouldn't cross your threshold. Not until—" She stopped, the rest of her sentence swallowed by silence. Samuel didn't press her. He only nodded as if he understood, though he did not. He set a small bundle down on the hay beside her. "Bread, cheese, and a flask of coffee. You'll need it more than me," he said, then turned to leave. But just before the barn doors closed behind him, he heard her voice, quiet, almost lost in the storm. "Thank you." It was the first time she had spoken to him without walls in her tone. The words stayed with him long after he stepped back into his house, carrying it like a spark of warmth through the cold night. The ranch had grown quiet again, yet neither Caleb nor Anna could find rest. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean sky and the smell of damp earth. Inside, however, the storm between them lingered, one made not of wind and rain, but of words unsaid and truths avoided. Caleb sat at the edge of the bed, boots still on, elbows resting on his knees. His head hung low, as though he carried a weight he didn't know how to set down. Anna stood across the room, her hands clasped together, her breath shallow. At last she spoke. "You never asked me why I came here." "Not truly." Caleb lifted his eyes, tired and wary. "You didn't owe me the telling, and I didn't think you'd want me prying." "I did," she said softly, "but I was afraid of what would happen if you knew." He stared at her, searching her face as though the truth might already be written there. "Afraid I'd send you away?" Her lips trembled. "Afraid you'd stop looking at me the way you do when you forget to guard yourself." Caleb swallowed hard, as if her words had struck him deeper than he wanted to admit. He turned his gaze to the floorboards. "Anna, I married you to save what little good name I had left. But the truth is, it hasn't been my name that's kept me standing these past months." Her breath caught. "Then what has?" He looked up at her then, eyes heavy with something raw, unguarded. "You, the way you've tended this house, the way you've spoken to me, even when I didn't deserve it, the way you breathe life into places I thought were dead." His voice broke, roughened. "I don't know how to stop needing that." The silence between them grew thick, charged. Anna's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "I'm not the woman you think I am, Caleb. My past isn't clean. If you tie yourself to me, truly tie yourself, the whispers will never end. They'll tear at what's left of your name." He rose to his feet then, slowly, like a man making a vow. He crossed the room until only a breath of space remained between them. His hand lifted, hesitant, before settling gently against hers. "Anna," he said, low and certain, "a name is just a thing folks use when they want to measure a man. But a soul is what you live with when the nights are long. You saved mine whether you meant to or not. Let them whisper. I've weathered worse storms." Her hand tightened in his, and for the first time since their marriage, she allowed herself to lean into the safety of his nearness. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his chest. The beat of his heart was strong, steady, and it echoed in her own. And in that dark, quiet hour, with the house wrapped in silence and the world beyond forgotten, Caleb made a promise he never spoke aloud but felt in every breath. He would not let her carry her burdens alone. By late spring, the prairie looked alive again. The pastures were a deep, rolling green, and wildflowers crept along the fence posts. The ranch, once so quiet, carried voices now, hers and his, mingling with the sounds of cattle, chickens, and the wind through the cottonwoods. For a while, Hannah let herself believe she could keep her secret buried. Each day with Matthew added another layer of comfort, another small stitch pulling her into the fabric of his world. She cooked for him, he fixed things for her. They sat on the porch some nights without speaking, just listening to the cicadas. Their silences were no longer heavy. They felt shared, almost gentle. But secrets have a way of finding their way into daylight. One evening, as Matthew sat at the table mending a saddle strap, Hannah found herself staring at him, her chest aching. She wanted to tell him everything, that she wasn't who he thought, that she hadn't come west simply for a chance at a new life but because she was running. Running from a man back east who still wore a ring she had once worn. Too. Her breath caught. She pressed her hands against her apron to stop them from shaking. Matthew looked up, sensing her tension. "You've gone quiet," he said. "Something on your mind?" She almost said it then. The truth balanced on her tongue, but she swallowed it down. She smiled, faint and unsteady. "Just tired," she murmured. He nodded, not pushing her. He never pushed. That was part of what made it harder. Later that night, Hannah dreamt of her past. The man's voice, sharp and cold. The promises he broke. The way he had sworn she would never belong to anyone else. She woke in the barn loft, heart hammering. The night air thick with the smell of hay. For the first time in months, she wished Matthew didn't sleep so far away. The rancher stirred early, as always, and found her already in the yard, feeding the chickens with trembling hands. He studied her, the way her shoulders hunched, the way her eyes seemed elsewhere. "Hannah," he said softly, "you can tell me whatever it is. I won't hold it against you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but fear was stronger than trust. "Not yet," she whispered, and so the secret stayed where it was, lodged like a thorn between them, not spoken but not gone. The house was quiet that morning, too quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to hush, as though it knew something was about to stir. She was sweeping the kitchen floor when her eyes fell on the desk tucked in the corner, the one he rarely used. A drawer was slightly open. She thought nothing of it until a slip of paper, yellowed and folded, peeked out. First, she told herself it wasn't her place. His home, his secrets, his past. But the longer she looked, the louder her heart thudded. She had given him trust without asking for anything in return. Yet some part of her still ached to know what shadows followed him. Her hand shook as she pulled it free. It was a letter, old but not forgotten. The words were short, written in a firm, almost desperate hand. "You could have come back. We waited. We begged. You turned your back and left us to bury him alone. Don't ever write again." There was no name signed, but the bitterness of the ink was sharp enough to burn. She pressed the letter to her chest, her breath caught in her throat. It explained nothing and yet everything. Why he lived as if half a man, why he never spoke of family, why his silences sometimes cut deeper than any words could. The floor creaked. She turned, startled, and found him standing in the doorway. His eyes dropped to the paper in her hands, and something inside him seemed to collapse. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. He only whispered, hoarse and broken, "You weren't meant to see that." The broom slipped from her grasp, and for a moment, the barn, the land, the very air between them held its breath. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bands of gold and lavender. The ranch was quiet except for the faint shuffle of cattle and the whisper of the wind against the fences. Inside the house, a lamp flickered, casting a warm pool of light that pushed back the shadows of evening. Eleanor sat by the small wooden table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had spoken little all day, though her presence had grown softer, less wary. Across from her, Thomas worked with the careful patience of a man used to solitude. He was mending a bridle, leather stretched across his hands, thread pulling tight with each pass of the needle. For a long while, the only sound was the rhythm of his work. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant. "You don't ask," she said. Thomas didn't look up right away. He set another stitch, then lifted his eyes, steady and calm. "Ask what? Why I came here? Why I stayed?" Her gaze flickered to him and away again. Most men would want to know. He leaned back, resting the bridle in his lap. His silence stretched, not sharp but thoughtful. Then, with the weight of honesty, he answered, "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Some truths," he said, voice rough with the steadiness of restraint, "need time before they can be carried out loud." Her breath caught, a sound so small it almost disappeared into the hum of the lamp. For weeks she had lived in his barn, carrying secrets like stones in her chest. No one had ever granted her such patience. Patience that was not born of curiosity or control, but of quiet respect. Eleanor's eyes filled, though no tears fell. She swallowed, then nodded once, a fragile acknowledgement. Thomas did not press her. He bent back over the bridle, his hands sure, his presence as steady as the land itself. And Eleanor, for the first time since she had arrived, felt that the weight of her secrets might not crush her after all. The room held no demands, no bargains. Only the quiet understanding of two souls who did not yet know what future they were shaping, but who, in their silence, had already begun to trust the shape of it. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, neither of them spoke again, but the air between them had shifted, carrying the promise that words, when they came, would be safe here. The morning sun fell pale and unhurried over the little town, its light slanting against clapboard buildings and dusting the unpaved street with gold. Inside the church, voices swelled low and reverent, drifting out the door in broken fragments of him. Daniel sat on the steps outside, his hat in his hands, his boots resting on the cool earth. He wasn't a man who often waited. Work had shaped him into someone who acted when needed, when a fence leaned too far, when the cattle wandered, when the river threatened to rise. But today, action had no place. He waited, and waiting felt heavier than labor. Each note of song from inside the church seemed to carry with it a memory he hadn't asked for. He remembered the last time he had entered these walls, with his wife beside him. Her hand had rested lightly on his arm, as if they shared not just vows, but the same breath. She had been gone for 2 winters now, and yet he could not bring himself to sit inside the pew where her voice had once joined the hymns. And now, here he was, waiting outside. Not for her, but for someone else. For the woman who had stumbled into his barn one snow-bitten night and refused to say why. The hymn ended. Footsteps and laughter trickled out with the congregation. Daniel lowered his head, not wanting to draw curious eyes. He heard greetings pass around him, neighbors asking after crops, children chasing one another down the street. He felt apart from it all, as if his place in town had grown thin at the edges. When she finally stepped out, he knew her shape even in the shifting crowd. She carried her shawl wrapped close, her eyes not rising at first. But when she did see him, sitting alone, hat twisting in his calloused hands, she paused. Their gazes met, and in that moment, the silence between them said what words could not. She did not look startled, nor ashamed, only steady, though a small tremor moved her fingers. Daniel stood. "I thought I'd walk you back," he said quietly, as though it was no more than a neighbor's kindness. She studied him, a long measure of stillness between them. Then she gave the smallest nod. "All right." Together they walked down the dusty street, neither rushing nor speaking, the morning stretching wide before them. The days grew colder, and frost began to edge the barn doors in silver. Each morning, Daniel would wake before dawn to tend the cattle, his breath misting in the chill air. And each morning, when he passed the hayloft, he found her already awake, kneeling by the narrow crack in the boards, staring at the pale light creeping over the hills. She rarely spoke first. Her silences were not rude but layered, like blankets stitched out of grief. He wondered sometimes what weight pressed her so heavily, but he never asked. It was in those wordless dawns that he felt something shift between them. She was no longer just a stranger who had chosen his barn, no longer just a fugitive from the storms inside herself. He began to feel her presence as something woven into his own routine. The sound of her steps above him was not intrusion, but rhythm. The faint murmur of her voice when she hummed to herself at night was not distraction, but comfort. And yet the line was thin. He knew nothing of her name, her people, or the sorrow she carried like an unseen wound. She knew little of his own, how long he had walked alone in this ranch house, how silence had been his only companion until her shadow entered his barn. It was a strange kind of kinship. Two souls who had never declared themselves friends, yet lived as if they were. One evening, as the sun sank and painted the sky with bruised gold, he found her sitting on the fence post, her shawl wrapped tight against the wind. He leaned nearby, hands resting on the top rail. "Winter'll bite hard this year," he said. She nodded, gaze fixed on the far horizon. "Hard winters make strong roots." The words caught him. They were not casual. They were the kind of words spoken by someone who had endured storms too fierce for most. He wanted to ask what roots she meant, hers or his, but he only nodded. They stayed there until the stars came, strangers who were beginning, quietly, without planning, to belong to each other's silence. There is something quietly sobering in realizing that, as much as humanity has invented and discovered, it has also forgotten. Entire libraries of thought, entire crafts, entire ways of living gone. Not lost in one grand cataclysm, but in the slow fade of disuse, neglect, or simply the passing of time. When we think of lost knowledge, the image that rises is usually the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Flames licking through scrolls, scholars weeping as the accumulated wisdom of centuries turned to smoke. But forgetting is rarely so dramatic. More often, it is quiet. A farmer does not teach his son the old way of planting because a new method is easier. A mason sets down his tools for the last time, and no apprentice picks them up. A recipe is written on a page, tucked into a chest, and the chest is left to rot. Knowledge slips away not with fire, but with silence. In the Middle Ages, there were countless small examples. Romans built aqueducts that stretched for miles, with arches still standing to this day. They understood cement formulas that could harden under water, binding stone into place for centuries. And yet, by the early medieval period, these skills were gone. People marveled at the ruins but could not replicate them. To them, Roman concrete was almost a kind of sorcery. The secret had slipped between generations. This forgetting happened in medicine too. Ancient Greek physicians recorded herbal remedies, surgical techniques, and anatomical observations. But when Latin Europe fragmented, much of this knowledge was scattered. For centuries, Europeans leaned more on charms, prayers, and folk cures than on what Hippocrates or Galen had written. The works were not rediscovered until translations flowed back from the Arabic world, where scholars had preserved them. And so, human progress has never been a steady climb. It is more like a tide surging forward, then slipping back. Think of medieval stained glass making. At one point, artisans crafted brilliant reds and blues whose formulas are now debated by scientists. Was it the presence of certain minerals? The way the glass cooled? No one can say with certainty. The windows still glow in Gothic cathedrals, but the exact recipes remain elusive. Even entire languages have been forgotten. Scripts carved into stone, Linear A in Crete, the Indus Valley symbols, or even the written languages of pre-Columbian America, remain undeciphered. Whole worlds of poetry, trade records, and myths are locked away, invisible to us now. We know that people spoke, wrote, sang, and remembered in these tongues, but the sound of their words has dissolved into air. And yet, forgetting has its strange beauty. Each gap reminds us of the fragility of knowledge, of the importance of passing things down. It is not only empires that collapse. It is recipes, songs, tools, and ways of knowing. In our modern world, where everything is stored, copied, and archived, it is easy to believe that nothing will ever be lost again. But the past whispers caution. Even digital records rely on fragile machines and fleeting formats. A clay tablet lasts millennia. A flash drive may last decades. Perhaps one day, centuries from now, someone will look at our ruins and wonder at the secrets we let slip through our fingers. The story of forgetting, then, is not only a tragedy. It is also a quiet reminder, what we do not tend to, we lose. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of what we lose is meant to remain in mystery, like the stained glass red that glows brighter than any modern window, or the unknown symbols carved by hands long gone. Beds are something so ordinary that we rarely think of them. Yet, the history of how people have slept is as long and winding as human civilization itself. Across thousands of years, humans experimented with surfaces, shapes, and materials, all in the pursuit of rest. And each culture, whether in icy mountains, sandy deserts, or crowded medieval cities, had its own answer to the simple question: where shall we sleep tonight? The earliest beds, the oldest known bed, dates back more than 200,000 years. In South Africa, archaeologists uncovered layers of grasses laid carefully inside a shallow pit. Mixed with these grasses were crushed leaves from plants that repel insects, almost like a natural bug spray. This shows that even the earliest humans thought carefully about comfort and protection in their sleeping places. In ancient Egypt, Wealthier households used raised wooden frames with woven reed mats stretched across. Raising the sleeper above the floor helped avoid insects and snakes, and also gave a sense of coolness in hot nights. Pharaohs and nobles sometimes slept on stone or wooden headrests instead of pillows, believing it kept the spirit aligned and safe while dreaming. Greek and Roman sleep. The Greeks and Romans were fond of luxury in sleep. Beds were often elaborate, with carved legs, feather-stuffed mattresses, and soft woolen blankets. Wealthy Romans reclined on couches for dining, but when it came to actual rest, they preferred layered bedding stuffed with straw, feathers, or even seaweed. Linen sheets were common in summer, while heavier wool blankets appeared in winter. In Rome, beds were also social and symbolic. To invite someone to sit or recline on one's bed could be an intimate gesture, showing trust and closeness. Sleep was never just a biological act, it was woven into the fabric of daily life. Medieval sleeping customs during the Middle Ages. Most common folk slept on straw pallets spread on the floor, called ticks. A tick was a simple cloth bag stuffed with straw or rushes, which could be refilled when it became too flat or dirty. These were not particularly comfortable, and families often shared them for warmth. In wealthier medieval homes, large wooden bed frames with curtains became symbols of status. The curtains were not only decorative but practical. They kept in warmth and blocked out drafts in cold stone houses. The mattress might be stuffed with feathers, wool, or a mixture of softer materials. Such beds were prized family possessions, sometimes passed down as heirlooms. It was also common for servants, apprentices, or younger children to sleep on trundles, small pull-out beds, placed beneath the master bed. This allowed everyone to share the same room while maintaining some hierarchy of comfort. Pillows and blankets. Pillows, too, have an ancient story. The earliest ones were made of stone, wood, or ceramic, designed less for softness than for keeping the head elevated and insects away from the face. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, headrests served spiritual purposes, thought to guard the sleeper from evil spirits that entered through the mouth or nose at night. In China, porcelain pillows were popular for centuries. Some were decorated with paintings and calligraphy, intended to inspire dreams. These hard pillows might seem uncomfortable to us today, but they were believed to protect health and keep the body properly aligned. Blankets evolved more slowly. Early coverings were often just animal hides or furs. Later, woven wool became the material of choice in colder climates, while linen or cotton sheets offered comfort in warmer lands. By the 17th and 18th centuries, quilt making flourished in Europe and America, turning blankets into both practical warmth and works of folk art. The invention of the modern bed. By the 19th century, mass production and industrialization brought iron bed frames, coil spring mattresses, and machine-woven blankets into many homes. This changed sleeping dramatically as beds became sturdier, more hygienic, and, at last, universally associated with comfort rather than simply necessity. The 20th century added innovations like memory foam, waterbeds, and ergonomic pillows, while in some places the simple tradition of futons or hammocks endured. Each culture's choices reveal priorities, whether it be warmth, coolness, health, or luxury. And so, as you drift toward your own rest, you join a tradition as ancient as humanity itself. Across the centuries, people have sought not only survival, but also comfort, safety, and a little peace at night. Time is something we live by today without even noticing. We glance at our phones, our watches, the clock on the wall. Minutes tick, hours pass, schedules unfold. But in the deep past, time was not so precise. It was something felt, not measured, guided by the sun, the seasons, and the rhythm of daily life. The earliest humans needed little more than the rising sun to mark the day's beginning and the fading light to signal its close. But as communities grew and agriculture took root, there came a need for structure. When should fields be watered? When should festivals begin? When should markets open? To answer these questions, humans turned to the skies. One of the earliest instruments of time was the sundial, a simple rod fixed upright in the ground, casting its shadow upon the earth. As the sun traveled, the shadow shifted, and by marking where it fell, people could divide the day into hours. Of course, sundials had their flaws. They worked only under the sun's watchful gaze. Clouds made them less useful, and nights rendered them silent. Still, they brought order to the day, and many ancient civilizations relied upon them. Where the sun could not serve, water could. Water clocks, known as clepsydras, appeared in ancient Egypt, Babylon, and Greece. A steady flow of water from one vessel to another marked the passing of time. Some were simple bowls with holes in the bottom, others elaborate containers with floats, gears, and indicators. These clocks could measure hours after sunset, giving priests, judges, and astronomers a reliable tool when shadows failed. In medieval monasteries, timekeeping took on sacred importance. The ringing of bells structured the day, matins before dawn, vespers at evening. Candle clocks, too, became common. A long candle marked with lines would burn slowly down, its wax serving as both flame and measure. Some even embedded small weights at intervals, which would fall with a gentle sound to mark the passing of another hour. Mechanical clocks would come later in the late Middle Ages. Driven by weights and gears, these devices transformed timekeeping. Towers in European towns began to sound the hours with chimes, a reminder to citizens that life was not only measured by the sun, but by the hands of a machine. For the first time, time itself seemed to belong to the community, not just to nature. And so, from shadow to water, from flame to gear, humanity has measured its days. Yet in all of it, the desire was not simply to count the hours. It was to bring rhythm and meaning to existence. To know when to gather, when to pray, when to work, and when to rest. The story of timekeeping is the story of our attempt to hold the fleeting. We cannot stop the hours, but we can mark them, and in doing so, we give them shape.